Many researchers often pay attention to the oil dependence of the Soviet Union and even believe that the decline in oil prices was the key factor in the collapse of the Union. And in this video we will talk about how oil production developed in the Soviet Union and why the Union got hooked on the oil needle. The first half of the 20th century was characterized by generally moderate oil production around the world. Then it was not so much in demand. The Soviet Union produced oil but practically did not export it, but mainly directed it to its own needs. During the industrialization and militarization of society, oil was extremely necessary. After the Second World War, the attitude towards oil began to change, and the Soviet Union began to find new oil reserves on its territory, so oil production began to appear in Western Siberia. Before that, the main oil centers were located only in the Caucasus. Another important change was the formation of a number of socialist countries around the world. In particular, all the countries of Eastern Europe, except Romania, did not have their own oil reserves. Because of this, the Soviet Union essentially became the main supplier of petroleum products to the countries of the Socialist bloc. Moreover, the Soviet government simply could not afford to allow oil from the West on the market of the socialist countries. In the 1960s, the Druzhba oil pipeline was even built, through which oil was delivered to the countries of the socialist bloc. In general, since the 1950s and 60s, there has been a fairly rapid increase in oil production in the Soviet Union. However, despite this, the Soviet Union is not yet on the path of oil dependence, since oil was worth negligible at that time, and exports to capitalist countries were just beginning to increase. It's also worth noting that it's during these years that important changes occur in the structure of oil exports. For the first time, the Soviet Union began to give preference to the export of crude oil. Previously, mainly oil products were exported. In fact, the main turning point for oil production in the Soviet Union was 1973, when oil prices literally jumped 4 times in 1 year. And with the new oil fields in Siberia, this changes the entire vector of the Soviet Union's policy for the coming decades. What was the reason for such a sharp rise in oil? The 1973 oil crisis was caused by a massive embargo on the supply of oil to Western countries. The embargo was organized by Arab countries and was caused by Israel's support in the wars in the Middle East. Arab countries not only restricted oil export to Western countries, but also reduced oil production in their countries. This state of affairs caused a sharp shortage of oil and consequently a sharp increase in oil prices. At the same time, although the Soviet Union has always supported Arab countries in wars against Israel, it decided not to miss the benefits and seize the initiative for the main oil exporter to the West. Thus, a sharp rise in oil prices and a virtual monopoly position in the market led to the fact that the Soviet government completely switched to oil exports and got hooked on the so-called oil needle. Since 1973, there has been a sharp increase in oil exports to Western countries. If in 1970 the revenue from the sale of oil was a little more than $1 billion, then by 1980, 15 billion. Oil prices continued to rise until the mid-80s. This was also influenced by the Iranian Revolution of 1978 and the Iran-Iraq War, which began in 1980. However, the described above events in 1973 was the first impetus for an increase in oil prices. This led to the fact that oil began to occupy a leading place in the structure of exports, and before the collapse of the Soviet Union, it fluctuated around 50% of all exports. Since then, the Soviet leadership has not solved any economic problems, but simply covered them with oil revenues. The year of stagnation was characterized by utter inertia in the economy, ignoring problems in the manufacturing and agricultural sectors. Modernization and optimization of production was not actually carried out. This led to the fact that soon the Soviet Union turned into a country that exports resources and imports finished products from the socialist countries. So if in 1970 the share of fuel in exports was 15%, then in 1987 it was 46%. Obviously, such a trend is disastrous and could not lead to positive results. In fact, all oil revenues were simply wasted and not directed to the development of other sectors of the economy, as it should have happened in healthy society. It's extremely interesting that the same event affected the countries in absolutely different ways. If the crisis of 1973 brought the Soviet economy into stupor, and in fact demotivated its development. Then with Western countries, everything happened exactly the opposite. The oil crisis has made it clear to Western countries that their economies are still too tied to the import of raw materials and need changes. This is how the transition to a post-industrial economy began. The main priorities were the production of goods that consume little raw material and energy, mass automation and robotization of labor, as well as the development of services with highly skilled labor. After the crisis, fuel-efficient cars began to appear for the first time. As we can see, this crisis gave Western countries an impetus to development. Summing up, we can say that the Soviet Union fell into the typical trap of countries with a resource curse. The discovery of huge oil reserves and a sharp rise in energy prices led to a complete demotivation for the development of other sectors of the economy, and led to the dependence of the Soviet Union on oil prices.